Hello friends, in this video we will discuss the basics of Forex transactions and Forex codes. So let's get going. A foreign exchange transaction involves the purchase of one currency against the sale of another currency for settlement or delivery. So two currencies are involved in a transaction. The exchange rate is the price of one of the currencies expressed in the units of the other currency. For most contracts like the USD SGD, if the contract is for settlement within 2 business days, the transaction is a spot transaction, else it is a forward transaction. There are exceptions like the USD CAD, USD Turkish Lira, the Philippine Peso, USD Ruble, and so on, where the transactions are to be settled on a T+1 basis, that is within 1 business day for spot transactions. Else it is a forward transaction. Basically, we have a currency pair in a quote. The first currency in a quote is called the base currency, and the second currency is called the quote currency or the counter currency or the term currency. For example, if the quote is USD SGD 1.3456, this quote expresses how much SGD is required to buy $1. That is, the quotation refers to the number of units of counter currency that is equal to 1 unit of the base currency. That is, 1 USD is equal to Singapore dollars 1.3456. If you sell 1 USD in the market, you will get SGD 1.3456, or you need Singapore dollars 1.3456 to buy 1 USD. Note that the Forex codes can also be looked at as an A by B fraction from an algebraic perspective. That is, USD SGD is USD divided by SGD in the sense that the USD SGD quote tells us how many times is 1 USD as compared to 1 Singapore dollar. For simplicity, we can say 1 USD divided by 1 SGD is 1.3456, means that USD is 1.3456 times powerful than 1 Singapore dollar. This is a simplification, but this is what you can see if you look at the codes from algebraic perspective. Therefore, if the USD SGD moves from 1.3456 to 1.4567, it will make the US dollar stronger. That is, it will take more Singapore dollars to buy 1 US dollar. That is, the USD will have become stronger or more powerful, or the USD will have appreciated against the Singapore dollar, and the Singapore dollar will have depreciated against the US dollars. If one buys USD SGD, this means that one buys USD by paying in Singapore dollars. In effect, the buyer of the USD SGD is buying USD and selling Singapore dollar at the given exchange rate. The counterparty in the same transaction is selling US dollars to the buyer and getting Singapore dollars in return. For example, if a trader buys 1 million USD SGD, he will get 1 million USD on settlement and pay Singapore dollars 1.3456 million to the USD seller. Basically, the two currencies will be exchanged. The buyer will pay Singapore dollars 1.3456 million to the USD seller, and the USD seller will deliver USD 1 million to the buyer and get Singapore dollar 1.3456 million in his bank account on settlement. Therefore, the buyer of the base currency, the first currency, say US dollar, will want the quote to go up after he buys the base currency. In such a scenario, he can make a profit when he sells the base currency at a higher rate to get more of the counter currency in which he paid initially. The counterparty, which is the buyer of the counter currency and the seller of the base currency, will want the base currency to depreciate and the counter currency to appreciate. In such a scenario, the seller of the base currency will make a profit when he sells the counter currency to get more of the base currency. In our example, if the buyer pays Singapore dollar 1.3456 million and gets USD 1 million, and the quote moves up to 1.3500, the buyer will be able to sell the USD 1 million to get Singapore dollar 1.35 million. This is more than the Singapore dollar 1.3456 million he paid by Singapore dollars 4,000, and that is his profit. On the other side, the seller sold or paid USD 1 million and got Singapore dollar 1.3456 million. Now at USD SGD 1.35, he will be able to sell the Singapore dollars 1.3456 million to get US dollars 1.3456 divided by 1.35 million, which is equal to US dollars 996,740.74, making a loss of US dollars 3,259.26. Of course, the US dollars 3259.26 is equivalent to Singapore dollars 4,400 at 1.35. The buyer's gain is the USD seller's loss. Therefore, for USD HDD 1.3456, the buyer of the base currency, that is the buyer of the USD and seller of the HDD, profits if the foreign exchange rate increases. That is, it moves up from 1.3456. And he loses if when the FX rate decreases, that is, it falls below 1.3456. The seller of the base currency, which is the buyer of the Singapore dollars and seller of the USD, loses as the foreign exchange rate increases and profits when the FX rate decreases or falls below 1.3456. Let's now discuss the bid-offer spread. In practice, a bank would quote two rates for a currency pair as follows: USD HDD 1.3456, 1.3459. Here 1.3456 is the bid rate. The bid rate is the rate at which the bank is bidding for the base currency. That is, it is willing to buy US dollars by paying the counter currency Singapore dollars. That is, the bank would pay 1.3456 Singapore dollars for 1 US dollars. 1.3459 is the ask or the offer rate. That is the rate at which the bank is offering or selling the base currency US dollars. The investor's perspective is obviously different. If you go to the bank to sell 1 US dollars, you will get only 1.3456 Singapore dollars. However, when you want to buy 1 US dollars, you will have to pay a higher amount to the bank, which is the ask rate of 1.3459. The bank sells at a higher rate and buys at a lower rate to make a profit. The profit is called the spread. For the USD HDD quote above, the spread is 1.3459 minus 1.3456, which is Singapore dollar 0.0003. This is what the bank makes when it sells 1 US dollars. Note that the profit is in the counter currency terms because the bank receives the counter currency Singapore dollar when it sells USD, and it pays in the counter currency Singapore dollars when it buys USD. This ends our video on basics of Forex. Thanks for watching and happy learning.